You alright? My name's Paul, I've got autism, and I make random videos based on my version of autism and the way my head works, and I stick the videos on the internet just in case you fancy giving them a watch. And I hope you're doing alright. Anyway, let's have a chat, because I don't want you to think the video is clickbait by saying, what really causes autism? You know me by now if you've seen me before. I'm not one of them clickbait muppets. I don't agree with any of that nonsense. But it is a relevant title because as much as I can't tell you, just as nobody else can, by the way, what causes autism, I can tell you what doesn't cause autism. And of course, it's only my perspective, this random guy sat here chatting his nonsense, waffling away. Because waffling means chatting nonsense in Manchester. All I can offer you is my perspective, but I don't really see other people talking with this perspective. But I do see lots of people saying the same things. So we need to approach it differently, I think. For a couple of good reasons. And one of the reasons is there's a lot of parents out there who've got autistic children, and like any good parent, they want the best for their child. They worry about their child's future because their child is autistic. So they will look towards so many different people, so many different coaches and therapists, and hear of these types of researches, pin their hopes on them, plough a lot of money into it, and they're no better off than before they started. So I hope if there's any of those parents listening, you pay attention and don't think I'm just trying to be negative. I promise you this video is nothing negative. It's just to the point, where I can get to the point. So the reason I wanted to do it and talk about things that don't cause autism is because there's been yet again another new study that's come out telling you what might be a cause of autism. And it's from Australia this time. And these people have gone, oh, there's a compound in plastics. And what we've found is that people who were mothers who were exposed to this, their children were 2 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism. We're not saying this is the cause of autism, but we are saying this could be an environmental factor which could increase the risk of having an autistic child. But not just any autistic child, an autistic boy. Now listen, I've been around autism long enough now to know that there is difference between boys and girls in relation to the way we are physiologically designed. I'm aware of that. But when it comes to things like autism, your sex doesn't make a difference. It can't. Because just like we've got stomachs and intestines and hearts, liver, kidneys, bones, muscle tissue, we're the same. Okay? The brain, we have brains. We're the same with brains. And male and females, last time I checked, both have brains. Not a lot of some of them use the brains, men or women. Look at the state of the world. But the point is we have them. What causes autism in boys will cause autism in girls. That's, I'd like to think, quite obvious. And if I'm miles off, then so be it. I'm allowed to be wrong. I am. But this just seems a little bit obvious. You can't say that, oh, well, it seemed to be more prevalent in boys. And it just sounds like they're still following the same old narratives where girls were left out of autism because the studies originally were done on the majority for boys. So it sounds like they're kind of still following on from that same old narrative that's just old, and we know it's old, and we know it's not accurate now. But the thing is, when I hear of another thing which causes autism, it just makes me laugh a little bit, because I've got one major question I want to ask. Why do we even need to figure out what causes autism? Are you trying to say autism's wrong? Are you trying to say, what would be the purpose of finding the definitive answer? It could be quite sinister, couldn't it? If they find it's a certain wiring, if they can introduce a medication or a way to, reverse that wiring during birth, then your children won't have autism. Well, why would you do that? I wouldn't be sat here right now if that was the case with the brain that I now have. And I like my brain, thank you very much. I know full well if it wasn't for my autism, I would not be doing the things I'm doing today. And I don't mean making videos. I just mean the drive I've got, the way I can hyper-focus. I wouldn't have that if it wasn't for my autism. I would never have achieved what I've achieved in my life if it wasn't for dialing into my autism and using that as the power that I needed to get through. I love my autism. So why do they want to find out? What's so important about finding out what causes autism? Because we're not chasing down the answer for why some of us are left-handed and some of us are right-handed, are we? We're not chasing that answer. It's not like, whoa, there's some left-handers out there. Let's figure out what makes their brains weird. No one's bothered. It's like you're either left-handed or you're right-handed or you're ambidextrous. I'm ambidextrous. Everything power is right-handed. But I write left-handed. Weird. Never know. And if I'm doing large writing, I do that with my right hand. Don't know why I shared that, but what I'm saying is nobody's telling me why. I haven't got an answer for why, but you know what? I don't care either. Why are we so bothered on autism? What is the problem? It's a serious question we need to ask. But when you do ask researchers and so-called specialists, they don't have an answer. They just say, it's so we can understand it more. But that's a nonsense answer, because if they wanted to understand it more, they would arrange a Teams meeting with me to just pick my brains so I could share my version of autism with them. As a self-aware autistic adult, I can provide them something they can't witness, and that's answers. Because we know, as autistic people, you can only see so much of autism, and that's what we let you see. The rest of it is mental. It's the way we think. It's how we mind map. It's how we process. It's how we find our answers and solutions to whatever's going on. It's the way we know how to dissect and pick apart social situations to make sure that we can get in and get out, causing the least amount of fuss and the least amount of damage back onto ourselves. I can explain that because I can explain my mental process. But no one's interested, but they claim to know autism better than autistic people. When the reality is, I'd say maybe 15 to 20% is what you can see with the reaction of others, the way they behave, the body language, the way they interact, but the rest of it is mental. So if we keep relying on researchers who are not autistic, we're still not going to get anywhere. And please remember, people who are experts in autism who are not autistic have taken education that was designed off flawed research and old research, learned as much as they could in that respect, got a nice big mark, got a PhD next to the name, and now they're the next step in trying to figure out the rest of autism. Yet in the meantime, there's quite a few of us knocking around who still haven't received that call over Teams to say, can I pick your brains about autism? So you have to wonder why they would go to babies in the womb, toddlers, children who are not old enough to speak or try to formulate answers which would make much sense. They go to them first and foremost each and every time and then avoid us like the plague. Wonder why that is. Is it because we potentially expose that all those millions of dollars on research that they're doing is for nothing? Maybe. Maybe autism is a very fun and easy thing for researchers to focus on because there isn't a counter-argument strong enough where someone will say, that's nonsense. Why are you doing that? I can provide an answer for what you're trying to research. It does bother me, as you can clearly tell, because I'm more than happy to talk to these people, but funnily enough, when I've sent them emails, when I've tried to contact them, you get nothing back. But then they'll release something else where they're there with that side-on picture with the cheesy grin. And it's like, this is what I've now figured out. And you're like, oh no, well that's actually wrong. I could tell you why that's wrong. But you don't want to talk to me. And you know what? I'm not saying it has to be me, but it has to be one of us, doesn't it? It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Because now, like I said, we've got plastics as a cause coming out of Australia. This is why people are autistic. It's because of plastics. Mothers exposed to plastics 2 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed if you're a male with autism, because it could be from an environmental factor. But just humour me a little bit with that, if you wouldn't mind. Because what else in my history? So I got diagnosed at 34. And since I was diagnosed, there's been countless other reasons produced. I'm not talking about the ones before I was 34. These are the ones from when I was diagnosed as autistic, as reasons that you might be autistic. So there was, for a while, they were trying to blame it on Diet Coke. If your mother drank Diet Coke, there's a good chance you're autistic. And then that went away. Tylenol. If you watch some, I watch quite a bit of American TV because I like watching the Food Network, and I like watching drive-ins, diners, and dives because that's proper food. That I'm not into your gourmet nonsense. Give me something that's going to make me full, and I'll be happy with that. But there's always adverts on, and it's like, did you take Tylenol during pregnancy? Does your child have autism spectrum disorder? If so, you might be entitled to a claim. And it's like, no, you're not. Stop it. You know? And that went away. Older parents was also something that they were saying. If you had older parents, you were more likely to be autistic than non-autistic. They also blamed bad parenting. So that was an environmental factor. The way we got treated, threw you in a shell. It's harder to come out, and you demonstrated autistic tendencies. They blamed it on vaccines as well, saying that certain vaccines caused autism. They said GI issues. Now, you need to listen to this one. There's so many people, and I've had these little ding-dongs on places like Instagram, where they'll put it up and go, my 4-year-old had autism. We changed my 4-year-old's diet. Now my child is free from autism. Hallelujah. Praise Jesus. All that stuff. So I will write, if your child has changed, I can assure you it wasn't autism. You were misdiagnosed originally. And that's not me to be a pain in the backside. That's just me saying it wasn't autism. Because whereas she's looking at someone who's 4 years old, I'm looking at someone who's over 40 years old. And I've done diets. And I have focused on them. When I used to do power building when I was about 19 years old, all I ate was a carnivore diet. And do you know what that did for me? It made me feel great. And it did. It cleared my brain up. The fog was lifting out of my mind. But that's simply because I was leaving behind anything and everything processed. I was focusing on nothing but lean protein. But I still had autism. You know, I didn't want to go to parties before I started the carnivore diet. And whilst I was in the throes of it, I still didn't want to go. It's not like at one time I was like, oh, keep me away from parties, you know, and then 6 weeks into the carnivore diet, and there we glow sticks in a rave. That didn't happen. All it ever does is clears your mind up with the fog that you get from processed food. It takes the sluggish feeling out your bones because you're eating clean. It doesn't get rid of autism. I can promise you that. So if you say, no, Paul, no, I changed my child's diet and their autism went away. They were misdiagnosed with autism because you can't get rid of it with food. All right? I've done plenty of different types of diets. I've done ones where I've just focused on shakes and bars from scientifically tested companies, you know, to get all your nutrients but eat the minimal amount. I've done all sorts. Still autistic. All right? So GI issues isn't the thing. I promise you that. Otherwise, all these autistic adults would all do a diet next week and they'd knock their autism into touch and go, if only I knew sooner. But it's strange how there's a lot of autistic adults who were even older than I am, who've had a really tough life. I'm pretty sure they'd just do the diet, sort it out and crack on. It's not real, I promise you that. Overweight parents, that was another reason for why people were autistic. Vitamin D deficiencies, low birth weight, flu, the mother having the flu during pregnancy was another trigger. Pesticides that were used on foods, and so on. and so on, and so on, and so on. There's just consistently something that isn't the same as the next thing where they go, oh, well, if it's not that, well, maybe it's this. And then Harvard and other big name places will apply millions of dollars at something, get these people with PhDs, doctorates after the name. They stare at something for a couple of years, bring out a paper, pat themselves on the back, and move on. All the while, people like me are sat there going, well, what was the point in that? I didn't do anything, but it still takes me back to my original question. Why do you want to know? Why do people need to know what causes autism? To me, autism is just a neurological difference. There are a lot of people with comorbidities within their autism. If I've got a comorbidity, the chances are it's ADHD and OCD. Because I even have OCD on technical levels where I've got to keep phones clean. You know, like everybody's name has to be perfectly written the same way with their first initial. Then with capital letters. Can't be a full first name in there. I have to still put where they work or ways of relating them. I clear pictures once a week on phones because I need it to be clean, clear. And I do that with nearly everything I've got. But I've never been diagnosed with OCD or ADHD, And I told you an ADHD story where I was sat here to write something down, and then the next time I checked back in with my brain, I was stood in the garden with a tape measure behind the garage to see where I could put a shed. And I'm like, how did I get out here doing this? I just can't stay on task, ever. So if I was to have comorbidities, they'd be the ones I do believe would probably come up. But there's a lot. I think it's over 93%, the last random statistics that were out there, saying that people with autism also have a comorbidity of a learning impairment. I don't. I have a learning difference. And that's very important to make the distinction on, because the way I see autism is that it's a different wavelength. It's a different operating system. So like short wave and long wave exist. They both exist. They're both absolutely fine for what they're needed for. We don't hate one more than the other. We don't have to figure why one exists because we've got the other one. We just accept both are there, and that's fine. That's how it needs to be with autistic people and non-autistic people, because non-autistic people can do so much, and they also can't do so much. The same applies to us. Now, we pick up what they don't and vice versa. So don't you think that sounds like we'd get a lot done together if we could work together? But the problem is we try. This is why the mask exists, remember, because we are out there trying to be someone we're not for everybody else's benefit, to live in their world so we can come away from it with the least amount of problem caused and the least amount of damage afflicted to us. We're not masking because we want to mask. We are masking because if we don't, detrimental things happen. And if you don't believe me, read comments on YouTube. It's littered with thousands of people who've shared stories from anywhere in the world, different sexes, ages, locations, where these types of things have happened. It's not just me making it up or needing sympathy or wanting you to feel sorry for me. It isn't. I'm just giving you a fact of the way that a lot of us feel as we're just trying to get through life. Different operating systems. That's all we are. Look at it. It's like you have Apple and you have Windows, or Apple and Android. I prefer one over the other, but I don't care that the other exists. Some people get so annoyed and they base their entire life decisions on if somebody has an Android phone. It's like, tramps, why have they got an Android phone? It's like, well, what's wrong with it? Some people get really hung up, but to me, they're just two different operating systems that exist in the same world, and I'm fine with that. I'm curious as to why people are not okay with that, because that's what we are. We're a different operating system on a different wavelength, but we accept that we live in a world where we are the fish being judged on our ability to climb trees. And everybody looks at us as if we're fish, and we can't understand why we can't climb that tree. We need to be accepted for what we are, and it's hard to get the acceptance when you consistently read things where it's a case of going, oh, what's causing autism? Oh, we need to figure out what's causing autism. We don't, because we don't need to look at what the cause of autism is. Why is it not just a difference? You have to ask that question. because we don't spend all the time in the world trying to figure out why we're left or right-handed. We just are. We accept it. We crack on. Although saying that, I mean, I'm left-handed for writing, but if I was going to punch someone, it's right-handed. And because I was writing with my left hand in school, one of my teachers tried to force me to write with my right hand, and my mum went in and kicked off and said that's not happening. Because she had a problem with it for some bizarre reason. But we don't do it. We don't pay attention to if we're left or right-handed. So why are we paying attention to if we're autistic or not? While these types of things exist, we're never going to get any type of acceptance. It's never going to be made easier. While all the money, time, attention, and effort is thrown into what causes autism, and they're in exactly the same place as they were 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line before they even started their research. What a waste of time, money, energy, and effort when they could have put that into, I don't know, learning about autism. So, all right, you've got autism. No worries. Let's figure out how to make it streamlined, easier for you. Let's develop better educational strategies. Because I'm rubbish in education. I look like the thickest person in the room. But the reality is, I'm not thick. I just can't learn how you want me to learn. It's like putting me in a classroom for a course, and then the tutor is Japanese. And it's like, I didn't think this was going to be difficult, but I had no idea they were going to talk to me in Japanese. And I don't speak Japanese. So I'm sat there for a week listening to someone teach in Japanese, and then the test papers put in front of me in Japanese. And I'm like, this is just not going to go in. I don't know, I'm going to fail miserably at this. So then I look terrible because I've struggled to pay attention, and then I get the exam and don't do well. But the reality is, I can't just absorb or hold a ton of information being thrown at me for me to remember it for a certain day to regurgitate it on a piece of paper. That's not the way my brain works. My brain works differently, and I can tell you how my brain works. My brain works in pattern recognition. My brain can see all these different things you're saying, and what it's looking for is a way to knit them and stitch them together so they join, so they link. So there's a way to create a full picture. So what happens is, with all that information, whether I think or remember it or don't, it sits on top of like a filter paper in my brain, and it slowly drips through. And with every drip, I'm like, is the link there yet? Is the connection there? Is the hook there? Is there a way to tie it together yet? And then one day, maybe 3 weeks down the line, 3 months down the line, the penny drops and it fuses together and it all comes alive. And in a year's time, the people who scored 100% on that course are phoning me for advice because I understand the subject matter in depth. I didn't learn the surface and retain the surface for a day and then forget about it. I now know that subject matter. It just takes time because it needs to knit and it needs to make sense. But people contact me way down the line for further advice on it. It just happened about a hot water system. Someone could not figure it out and they were on the same training as me. They scored amazingly well on the exam and I didn't. Educationally, I am terrible in the design that we're given. So why isn't all the money, time, energy and effort put into finding the correct way to educate, which would be by tying one part to another part and not just giving loose bits and going, if you remember all that, this is it. We could create pattern recognition learning. And by doing that, autistic people would be strongly advantaged to learn that way because then it makes sense because it is all logic and order. Other people might suffer, non-autistic people, because they haven't got our operating system, and that's fine. The other side still works for them. But we need something for us. But we get judged as being thick and not intelligent because we're expected to be the fish being judged to climb a tree, and that's not fair. As far as I'm concerned, people need to stop looking into the cause of autism because there isn't a cause. It's not a flaw. It wasn't brought on by a flaw. It's not a weakness somewhere. It's just a difference like being left-handed or right-handed. That's all it is. But because we're governed by people who are not autistic, they're convinced there's something wrong with it because they've given us a world we don't environmentally thrive in. So they think we're flawed. Whereas I know we're not flawed because when I create my world, I excel. And when I talk to people on Patreon, for example, the people who are on there and we've swapped emails and I hear about their life and what they do and how they recharge, what bothers them, they're not the bad in the world. You know, turn the news on. There's terrible things happening, but 99.99% of things happening in the world are not because of autistic people. Why aren't they putting the time, energy, and effort into figuring out why humans are self-destructive? That would be much more important to try and figure out, wouldn't it? But I don't care about your power, your ego, your finances, your job role, your sex, your colour. I don't care. I can't grasp why war exists, why killing needs to happen, why fighting exists, why we create weapons that could destroy the earth. I don't get any of that. All I care about is, are you a good person? Are you good? Do you treat people how you want to be treated yourself? Do you not do to others things you wouldn't want done to yourself? Are you legal? Are you just? Are you a good person? Are you respectful? Because if you are, you're my kind of person who I would want to talk to. All the other things, I don't care. As long as you're happy, healthy, leave me alone, we're good. Tick all those boxes I've just mentioned, great. So why am I wrong because I'm autistic? Why do you need to figure me out? Don't worry about me. I'm not the one causing wars. I'm not the one wanting anyone to die. I don't believe I'm better than a single human being on the face of the earth. And for people who do believe they're better, then shame on them because you're not. You're a hunk of meat and skin. Your actions matter. That's what make you the person. And that's what I care about. I have very simplistic wants and they get mocked like, if all it was that simple. It is that simple. People want to make out that it isn't that simple. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love to go, maybe there's a secret reason why people are trying to figure out why we're autistic. Maybe they want to figure out what that coding is in our mind to make more people autistic. Because we're not the warmongers. We're not the ones trying to kill each other. Maybe we're the good in the world. Maybe that's it. Maybe we're the cure. Maybe instead of trying to find the cure for autism, they're trying to find a cure for the plague of humanity and the way it treats itself on self-destructive conditions. Maybe they want to figure out our code to see why we're not like that. That's what I'd love to think. But unfortunately, whilst we're governed by non-autistic persons who believe they know best because they have a PhD, and they don't and won't talk to people like me who are willing to talk to them, whilst they are paid to research what causes autism, why not see what it's like being autistic from an autistic person's perspective who's tried and applied and done something with his life and really pushed through everything that's been thrown in front of him? And trust me, this is not a pat on the back when I say stuff like that, but I am damn proud of how I've turned out. And I'm allowed that, because I know where I've been and I know what I've been up against. So to sit here today and go, all I've got to do now is spin those plates, maintain, because I've put in the hard work for a not so hard life. I'm going to take the credit for it because I did that when people were kicking me and trying to keep it back. No, I did it. And it was my autism, the hyper focus that forced me through and got me to where I am. And one day I'll be able to breathe out. But until I can, I've got to spin the plates and maintain. But no one wants to learn about the drive and the hyper focus and the passion and the forceful through nature that we can hold. They want to talk on our behalf by studying toddlers. And they'll never learn anything that way. So I can't tell you what causes autism, but I can tell you what doesn't. And what doesn't is ignorance. Anyway, I hope that made sense. But until next time, my friends, thanks very much for watching and keep smiling.